All right. Hello to everybody who's joining. My sport here is wheelchair rugby, also known as murder ball. And before I get started, I just wanted to thank everybody with the Marquette sports performance staff for having us on this semester. Learned a lot of stuff, had a lot of fun, really grateful for the opportunity. All right, so wheelchair rugby, kind of a newer sport compared to a lot of the ones out there that we've been looking around at. It was founded in Canada, in Winnipeg, in 1977. It was a group of guys just kind of messing around. They were all Paralympic guys that were used to playing Paralympic basketball, and they wanted to come up with something that was a little bit more physical. So it kind of just happened, and it's grown a lot since then. It picked up slowly, and 1993, they got a governing body, which is IWRF, International Wheelchair Rugby Federation, still governs the rules and regulations and everything, officiating to this day. But another big step up for it was at the Paralympic Games in Sydney, Australia in 2000. They were added as the only full contact Paralympic sport, and that still is true today, which makes it one of the biggest draws of a lot of the Paralympic sports and biggest viewership. It's mixed gender, so there's no men's and women's teams. They're together. Usually there will be more men on a team than women, but it varies from team to team. And there's now 25 active international teams that compete. And how competitions work is pretty much every year it works out that there's one big international competition with a bunch of other smaller tournaments sprinkled in. So they have like a World Cup quadrennially every 4 years, in even numbered years, alternating with the Olympics. So Olympics every 4 years, that's every 4 years, but they're separated by every 2. So every 2 years, there's a big World Cup event. And in the odd years in between, they do like regional, they divide the world into zones. And like, for example, the European zone, they compete by zone and have kind of like in every other year World Cup kind of deal going on. So for the rules, they are on a basketball court or a hardwood court that's the exact same dimensions as a basketball court. It was invented on a basketball court, so that makes sense. The scoring zone is not the full length, not the full end line. It's 8 meters wide. They have pylons marking that, so you have to break that plane in order to score a goal, which is the only 1 point denominations. There's no other like tries or anything of that sort. It's just goals like soccer. 4 quarters that are 8 minutes each. It's to describe it, it's pretty much a combination of like rugby and basketball. It's more fast-paced than rugby is, with higher scores that resemble more like basketball scores in the 40s or 50s for each team. But obviously a lot of the rules are more like rugby. There's no shooting the ball or anything like that. And one key point is that when you score by crossing the goal line, you have to have at least two of the 4 wheels of the wheelchair down. It looks like they only have 2 wheels, but they've actually got 2 other wheels that are much smaller underneath. The big side like shield wheels are like a couple inches above the smaller wheels, and like you can kind of rock side to side, and those are obviously more efficient than using the small ones, but that's a rule. You have to have control of the ball before you cross the plane. Now, something that makes it really interesting, so to be eligible, athletes must have some form of disability with a loss of function in both the upper body and the lower body, upper limbs and lower limbs. And they have classifiers, wheelchair rugby classifiers that are like officiating guys or analysts that go around and they examine the new players and they give them a score based on their physical ability pretty much. So the bottom end of the spectrum is 0.5 up to 3.5, 3.5 being the most able cognitively, like, so the people that are in this, some of them have injuries that they sustained, like maybe an accident or something, and some have more like a cerebral palsy, or some people will be almost quadriplegic, where they'll be like missing hands, but they can still play defense and that kind of thing. So it really varies, but generally they put the lower scored players on defense and the higher scored ones on offense. And the big thing with that is you can't exceed 8 points with the players on the court at a time. So you could, for example, have like 2 3.5s and 2 0.5s, or something that adds up to 8. It can't exceed 8. Now, there are 12 people on a team in total, 4 on the court at a time. So it's a little less crowded than basketball or rugby. Now, also, it follows a lot of the basketball rules. So there's a shot clock that's 40 seconds. They rarely use. I watched the video, and we'll check out a video here in a minute so you guys can kind of get a feel for it. But they'll rarely use up the full 40 seconds. It's really fast paced. They also have like a backcourt violation for basketball. And once you cross into the front court, you can't go back into the backcourt. And you have to, interesting rule here is that every 10 seconds, you have to either pass the ball or dribble it. You can't just hold on to it and wheel around for 10 full seconds, otherwise they'll call it. And same thing, there's another 10-second rule, which is you can't stay in the backcourt for 10 seconds. You've got to make it to the front court. Contact, it's not quite as rough as it can be made out to be. So like contact is, it's full contact, it's all allowed. It's just, you can't have anything like malicious or dangerous, particularly like hits in the back or blindside hits. So it's kind of like football in that, no blocks in the back, but you can still contact people in the front when they're expecting it. So here, let's play this video. Really just see the upper body force and power that guy had to generate to go at that high speed. Really more upper body than we're probably ever used to using. A lot of attacks on the shoulders because their arms are their legs, which really changes a lot in the programming. You see just how fast-paced it is. It resembles more a basketball game than football or rugby. Also, by the way, this is from 2016 Rio Paralympic Games. This is I believe a quarterfinal match between Australia and Great Britain. And there you can see like the foul lines, even if you touch it at all with foot, hand, well not foot, but wheel, hand, anything of that sort, out of bounds, change of possession. So to analyze the movement, it's all upper body. There's no legs involved at all. In fact, if you do have use of your leg and you push off with your foot or kick or anything at all, that's a penalty. One other thing I should mention is a lot of the penalties, depending on severity, they have penalty boxes like hockey. So depending on severity of the penalty, you sit in the box for however long. Some of the main focuses are you need a lot of rotator cuff stability. Didn't show it necessarily in that video, but they'll often do like long court passes or, just passing the ball to each other, getting full extension, going up for the ball and contacting. You want to have strong rotator cuffs for that to avoid injury. Not quite as relevant as that, but neck stability, similar to football. Like you get jarred in a hit, you don't want to have a head injury. You really got to focus on strengthening the neck to avoid that. And then there's a lot of trunk rotation. A lot of the videos I looked up where there's people falling over from collisions, you turn to brace yourself with your hands, turning to grab the ball behind you, doing a lot of twisting and turning with the thoracic spine. in this sport. So that's something really focused on in training. Going off that, some of the common injuries, I found a really good study that was done in 2015 by the NCBI, which is the National Center for Biotechnology Information, done in conjunction with the U.S. National Library of Medicine. It was a 9-month observation of the Polish national wheelchair rugby team, and rather obviously, there's a high incidence of minor injuries. You know, your fingers get caught in the wheels and things like that. You saw a lot of the guys in the video wearing gloves, wearing elbow pads, some sort of protection like that. Now, some of the more serious injuries to train for, in this particular study, they had multiple players get supraspinatus strains. It was only like 2 over the 9-month period, but it was still the most common injury. Rotator cuff, and I think that's predicted. Get some tennis elbow, bursitis kind of stuff in the elbow, olecranon, bursitis. Bruised ribs from contacts, and there can be, with that rotation I mentioned earlier, some sort of lower back tweaking and injuries like that. The more serious ones that I listed there are all the injuries people had to go see a physician for. Here's the competition schedule. Based on the USA wheelchair rugby team, based on the Olympics for this year, 2020, assuming they were still going on, or the Paralympics, I should have that corrected up there, which takes place right after the regular Olympics in Tokyo, late August to early September. They select the team in mid-December, and that's basically when you can first have a training program with all the guys together. You can see they meet several times for a couple-week periods at some Olympic training facilities. I watched some videos on that, and it's actually really interesting because the whole facility, you don't think of how much goes into catering to Paralympic, like in the wheelchair. Like, for example, in the dining room, they don't have chairs. It's all at the right height for them to pull up. And it's the same with all of the weight room. There's a lot of differences in the weight room that you wouldn't really think about, such as like when you're doing lifts, you gotta block the wheels so they don't, like if you're doing like cable rows or something of that sort, you either have to get out of the chair or block the wheels. You don't want to have pull-up bars as high up because they're not able to stand up that high. For bench, they're strapped in. If any of you have ever watched Paralympic powerlifting, they'll get on the bench and then they'll have someone put like a belt around the bench and themselves at the waist and strap them in. So just a few smaller things like that that you don't really think about. Now, we also have 2 competitions in this cycle that are smaller tournaments, like I mentioned, where the full team is going to be competing. So I marked them with orange in tournaments because that's obviously going to have to be it's going to be a higher strain period where I'm going to back off in training a little bit to allow them reduced risk of injury, more recovery time, etc. Some of the fitness tests, I had to get kind of creative here because obviously you really don't realize how many tests use the legs and how many lifts. All the compound lifts like squats, cleans, deadlifts. The only one that really doesn't is bench. So it's the same with fitness tests, vertical or any sort of sprints. The sprints are replaced with, I have a 10, 20, and 30 meter sprint listed on there, which is just in the wheelchair, you know, testing for time. It's still relevant. And I didn't go past 30 meters because the court is 28 meters long. Arm bike, that is, you can do that for long-term endurance or short-term bursts. Medicine ball, overhead throw, or chest pass. I researched, I didn't see any literature on that, but I thought that would be a good measure of strength myself. Pretty much how far you can throw it, get a heavier med ball that within a facility like Marquette isn't going to go further than the full length, and you can measure it. I've seen them do that at football combines. And then the 20-meter shuttle is one that was in literature that is used by Paralympic rugby teams, wheelchair rugby teams. It's, you go down 10 meters, you do a U-turn around a cone, and you come back 10 meters. And that's kind of their gold standard fitness test. Here's the annual plan that I have. I have them for 36 weeks based on when the team formulates, and I divided it into 4-week mesocycles. And throughout the entire time, I plan on training 3 days a week. I was really looking towards more like 4 or 5, but I was talking to Dan about it, and one of the things that I really had to go back and reconfigure is that their arms are their legs. You wouldn't, if it's your mode of transportation around, just getting around the house or outside every day, you're not going to do a leg day every day of the week. You have to have some rest time built in there. So you have to be really mindful of that. And also the main thing is I want them to be playing or practicing wheelchair rugby. That's what's going to make them better ultimately. And this is just supposed to be complementary. So I decided 3 days a week would be best, probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday. These guys are going to be all spread out all throughout the country. So just 3 days a week with breaks between, so you get the 48-hour rest and you can work full body all at once instead of breaking it into like muscle groups. I have 3 tapers built in there. Those are during competitions. First phase, general physical preparedness phase. You first get the guys back and together, and you kind of want to return them to standards. They've been off training on their own, doing their own thing. Now they're standardized in a team setting of sorts. Want to get them back on a good cycle for sleep, nutrition, work ethic, and just build up base strength. Some kind of basic exercises here. Set range should be a little higher, and rep range, but kind of lighter weights. And I put an asterisk by rotator cuff on some of the sample exercises because that's something I want to build up the strength in right away. That's really a key injury and a key component to every movement that they do. I want to get on top of that before it becomes a problem. Also, some sort of rotational core exercises, and I put banded neck in there. Those top 3 are to get them on track to avoid injury later. And then some upper body introductory exercises like pull-ups. I didn't want to list too many exercises, but I'll be doing bench press will be like their main compound movement throughout. Do variations like incline bench as well. And then rope sled pulls where they have to be blocked off, or have their wheels blocked so that the chair isn't pulled, but you have a slide and you're pulling it towards yourself with a rope. That's kind of a functional fitness kind of thing I wanted to throw in there to start off before we got into all more like machine type stuff or more the strength cycles. And the arm bike, do some higher rep stuff at the end, or some longer, not high reps, some longer term stuff, some more endurance to get them back in shape. Next phase is strength, also a 4-week cycle. And the goal is just to build up strength at the beginning. They get their base strength, get reintroduced with the GPP phase. Before this, this adds on to that. Set range, about the same. Reps get lowered a little bit, and the load goes up. Based off of 1 rep max is mostly just for like bench, but the same intensity applies for other lifts, but maybe not necessarily measured in 1 rep max. You're not going to 1 rep max on a lat pull down or on a shoulder press, but more of like an RPE scale, slowly building up over time. So here we really get into more of a focus, the main parts of exercises, or the main exercises of the lifts at the beginning, being bench and incline bench, maybe one of those on Monday, one of those on Friday, and in between maybe more shoulder press variations like a military press. Also throwing in just a lot of really common upper body exercises to build up strength. So they'll be prepared for whatever physical beating their body takes when they're actually out there. And of course, explosiveness, cable row, lat pull down, tricep extensions. Got to break up your upper body into every muscle group to put it in for these guys. Then I want to do a hypertrophy phase. This is following their first competition. If you look in the bottom right corner, you can see the full year plan. The tapers are all about a 1 to 2 week break where I back off a little bit, and I have a slide on that later, but just noting that this is after that. Hypertrophy, going to be more sets, a lot more reps. Want to increase muscle size so they can prepare for heavier loads later on and have, more durability when they're actually in competition later. So backing off in the percentage a little bit, but higher reps. And this is, you know, more of the bro kind of stuff for anybody out there. You know, you got curls and that kind of stuff, but I'll keep it just to one cycle like that, because I think it's relevant here just because they're, like I said, their arms are their legs, so you can get away with some of that kind of stuff. Strength endurance phase coming after that, basically just bridging the gap from hypertrophy back to getting into more of the max strength phases that are going to be lower reps. So it's going to be a rep range instead of 10 to 15 or 5 to 8, like in the strength phase. Strength phase is following this. It's going to be 8 to 12, and 1 rep max will be kind of a moderate range in there. Some of the exercises. Continuing to work on shoulders. Shoulders are the main way of movement here when you're wheeling. Also a little bit of chest, biceps and stuff involved, but it's primarily shoulders. A lot of shoulder press, a lot of bench, dips, lat pull down, shoulder press. I do have some of the things I didn't list enough of are some of the more dynamic things, like what you do with the Raptors. If I have access to something like that, like some pulls, some twists, like the wood choppers that the women's lacrosse team does with Stu, where you're swinging and getting that rotational work in. And then later in the workouts, some sort of wheelchair sprints, things like that, just to keep up on that, but not too much to overload it with the practice that they have going on. Max strength phases 1 and 2. This is 8 weeks total, and this is like the main strength phase as we kind of get into the thick of it later on. You got the second competition coming up, getting closer to the final competition, ultimate goal, which you want to taper for is the Olympics. Rep range goes down, sets stays pretty high from 4 to 6. Originally I started off with like 3 to 4 reps beginning of the year, so starting to get more intense here. And how it's going to change is I'm going to have progressions with bench. Like in the first cycle, maybe more like a pause bench, or I like the idea of chains to add resistance for shoulder press or bench, and then taking that load off, the resistance part of it, and increasing the weight for the second cycle here to really drive those maxes up. But a lot of banded movements I have on here because, you know, if you think about it, like a bent over dumbbell row is really hard. So like prone laying on a bench is the thing you're going to have to adapt for, or seated in the wheelchair, all kinds of banded stuff like face pulls, so that because they really can't bend over or lay back. I'd love to work on some sort of like glute ham extensions in a machine like that, but it really depends on the athlete, each athlete individually, because they all have different impairments. They all have different strengths and weaknesses in their upper body, and as to how much function they have in their lower body. So there's going to be a lot of more catered workouts, like there would be when you see injured guys for lacrosse, where they all have sort of their own thing going on. There's going to be a lot more of that, but this is like the generalized stuff I want to follow. Almost to the end here, power phase. This is coming after the second competition in Canada. I believe it's the Canada Cup. And this is where we're really going to get low, take the high intensity of a lot of reps off, but really increase the load and try and just go for pure power. This will be a little longer cycle, 6 weeks. Instead of adding in another 4-week cycle in there somewhere, I thought I'd extend this one and really try and build some speed and explosiveness in their upper body. Coupling some exercises like bench with plyo med ball toss with a partner, where they're doing a really heavy exercise and then doing a plyometric right after it. Or some sled sprints, lightweight, attached to the wheelchair, so that they can, again, kind of build that sprint explosiveness. And then here's just a breakdown of kind of what I was going, what I want to do with the tapers. Really, it's only for a week or two to back off. I don't want to do it more longer term. And the sample exercises begin with like foam rolling, soft tissue. It's not like completely back off from training, but I just want to emphasize that there'll be some more of that at the beginning. Take 10 or 15 minutes to really do that. And foam rolling, actually, come to think of it, it would be better off to use some of those like massage guns like Hyper Ice, because foam rolling is really for legs, and that's they'd have to adapt to use like lacrosse balls or something, like have a partner Hyper Ice gun kind of thing going on here. And obviously also a lower percentage in the Warner Max. All right, that's the end of it. Questions, anyone?
Colton, good presentation. Just wondering, and I guess everyone really can kind of chime in with this as well, but have you guys in your undergraduate studies and Zach with your graduate studies, has anyone had classes with like special populations in mind in terms of like disabled athletes, spinal cord injured athletes, and what the requirements are for those kind of people?
No, I haven't. I caught a glimpse of that. I did senior year of high school an internship at a physical therapy clinic, and there is a patient or two that in the older population where it wasn't really athletics that they were doing, but just general rehab stuff, maybe short term after a surgery or long term.
We go through one class called special populations, but it's more focused on I guess I would say just like special populations within the medical field. So we talked about a lot of like diabetes, obese people, and then a lot of like mental disabilities. But I think the most experience I've ever gotten with special populations like that is I worked with the Adaptive Abilities Club on campus, and we went and took kids rock climbing with physical and mental handicaps. So being able to try to figure out ways that those athletes can climb the walls if they don't have use of their legs or their arms or either one, or just have mental disabilities as well. So that's probably the most experience that I've gotten working with a special population like that.
I took a course and it was called Sociological Aspects for Kinesiology, and we didn't necessarily look at exercises for special populations, but we looked at accessibility and what it takes to truly create an accessible facility, and just the amount of space that you have to have in a room where you can have the pathways for people in wheelchairs to get through, and the machines that accommodate those types of individuals. It was just really eye-opening, I would say.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I was doing the research for this, and I found a couple really cool videos on YouTube that are just like 4 or 5 minutes long, particularly about the USA Wheelchair Rugby team and their training facility. And it's quite extensive and really awesome that they have a facility like that. I think it's in Birmingham, Alabama. And it's not just them, it's all the Paralympic, and especially wheelchair athletes go there to train for a few weeks, and take a nice oasis for them. One other thing I didn't mention also is like catering to people who maybe don't have necessarily like the grip strength, say they have some sort of palsy, or maybe they don't have hands, amputee, having to use like straps or something for to adapt some of the exercises, like pull downs, or I also saw I looked at some of the Paralympic like powerlifting stuff to see how some of them adapted, and there's someone who had like a fixture added on to the end of their arm where they don't have a hand, so that they could like grasp the bench and do things like that. It's just something else to think about.
Any other questions for Colton?
Colton, I did have one question for you.
Yep.
So you mentioned with some of the exercises, you would be incorporating the wheelchair into them for like something like a face pull or even some sort of overhead press for that. As you would get closer to the tournaments and games, would you start to incorporate the wheelchairs more into the workout to make it more sport specific?
Yes, and that was something I don't think I represented that well in the presentation, adding in like at the end of workouts more, because I wanted to kind of make this like resembling a little bit of football or some of the other contact sports like that. And what we did in my training, in my experience, was you have like all the strength and hypertrophy exercise early on, but at the end there's always some sort of conditioning or some sort of agilities or something like that. And I would definitely incorporate it, not like super high volume, but maybe like say 3 or 4 sprints on the end, or maybe some conditioning on the hand bikes, like what we saw Emily do with women's soccer when they're in the off season. And they didn't have to worry about fatigue as much, like with games coming up, and they did their treadmill stuff. But I'd also do maybe some lower fatigue stuff as we came closer to competition, just to keep things moving and keep them in the habit of, like, you know, they're not bodybuilders. I want to add some size and strength to them, but ultimately they're dynamic athletes that are similar to sprinters, but they're using their upper body instead of the lower body.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think one thing I didn't mention on like the second slide, I didn't address, there was, I put the movie banner up for Murder Ball, which was a movie that came out in 2005 about wheelchair rugby, if anybody's interested in seeing that. It was, I think it's the highest, I was surprised to hear that's the highest rated sports movie on Rotten Tomatoes. So I should watch it sometime.
Good stuff. Yeah, have to try and view that one.